Hello, can you?
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
good.
All right.
All right.
We have everybody.
Not quite yet. I'll keep switching around. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Getting close.
Okay.
We'll give it just another minute
Yeah.
before we get rolling, but appreciate everybody taking the time to be here again tonight. That's great. Let's see, how do I change that? There we go. See, everybody, that's an easier view. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we're 11, yeah. There's 14 in the class, so I know some can't make it all the time, so. Well, the others will jump in, I guess, so. All right, I'm gonna stick my head in the side door over here just to say hi. Glad you guys were able to join us tonight. Glad to have, I call him actually I call him Michael, but Dr. V, because I'm not sure I pronounce his last name correctly. So we're glad to have him here. We're going to talk about some food and beverage topics tonight. Dr. V is a professor here at Western. You've been here since
2011.
2011. So a great faculty member, great colleague here with us. I greatly appreciate all of his contributions here at Western and in the business school in general. So I'm going to stay off to the side and let him be the focus here. But we've got a few, 4 or 5 different topics that we'll hit. Certainly, if you have questions along the way, wave your hand. I'll try to keep my eyes on the screen to see if you guys have questions. We'll certainly leave some time at the end for that as well. But I'll let Dr. V start out by kind of introducing himself, giving you a little bit of background there, and then we'll get rolling. That sound good with everybody? Good. Okay. I see nods or thumbs up. That works for me. So
Okay.
Very good. Thanks. So Dr. V.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Happy to be here. Dr. Nelson asked me to talk to you just to give you a little background why I teach here at the business school in the resort management program. And that focuses a lot on tourism, recreation, but also then the accommodation and food part of the industry. And my personal background is a lot in the food industry. I was one of the first person to have artisan baking and baking stores in the U.S. down in Texas. One of the first ones that got into food carts way back in the 80s when it was rather primitive and breaking ground. So quite a bit of background in food and beverage. I also teach microbrewing and artisan distilling as part of the program. So we have a big class every other year in the beverage or microbrewing and artisan distilling class. We drink a little bit, but we also make it academic. So I don't want to get your hopes up and say, when you take that class, that you bring a lot of craft beer. Anyways, my background is being from Europe. You probably can hear that by my accent. So if I'm not quite clear on something, just let me know right away and I'll try to rephrase it or restate it. And I've also been in the European food business, mostly in Switzerland and in Germany. So I have a little bit of European and American approach to food and beverage management. Not much experience in South America and Africa, but other parts of the world quite interested in cuisine and different types of approaches to food and beverage. That's a little bit about myself. As Dr. Nelson said, I've been here now 8 months. I moved over from Switzerland, from one set of mountains to another set of mountains. So one of these days I have to move to an ocean. I don't know about this.
I think it's more than 8 months, though.
8 years. Did I say 8 months?
Yeah.
8 years, sorry. See, the time flies when you're having fun, so it's 8 months. So anyway, there are a couple of areas that Dr. Nelson gave me to think about and talk to you about. And please jump in if you have questions or you want to explore that topic some more. This doesn't mean it exhausts the topic. It doesn't mean, I can tell you everything about F&B in the hour that we have today. There's one area that I would like to talk about is certification issues in the food and beverage industry, and certification in regard to concerns about liability and what kind of shift we see today from the food and beverage provider or server to the employee that is actually involved in providing food and beverages. Then I've prepared a little bit about international food and beverage issues as I know them today from the worlds that I work in. And then some more operational issues on food and beverage oversight and issues that are very operational and practical for the food and beverage industry. And the last one I had then looked at was some kind of challenges, opportunities as they look at the industry. Before I start, just one thing is I try to look at, one is the food and beverage industry, what means established restaurants and hotels, but also try to focus a little bit on special events, because if you're in the outdoor industry, a lot of your exposure to food and beverage will be setting up an event. You have a new mountain bike breakout, they have a new day of testing that mountain bike or that ski, and there has to be a food and beverage event that might fall into your responsibility to organize to support that new introduction of a product in that market. So that's what I'm trying to focus on a little bit as well as we talk. The certification really, the question begins to be why. We have seen a lot more certifications in the food and beverage industry over the last years. It's mostly about third-party liability issues. We have liability dram shop laws in the United States where if you as a server or the operator of a food and beverage operation cause a damage to a third party, you are liable for that particular incident that has happened. And as a response, the industry has now put in a lot of certification programs where the servers of that beverage or that food has to be licensed and take some of the responsibility of the owner from, in that case of a liability. One of the cases is you probably have heard about is it's called TIPS, T-I-P-S, which is a training for interference procedures. I don't know whether anybody has heard about this. Yes, okay, some of you are familiar. You might have perhaps taken it because if you get involved in beverage service, it is kind of a preparation to show you how to responsibly serve alcohol. Also shows you what are cues for intoxicated patrons and how to turn them down, how to stop serving alcohol if you find that they're intoxicated. So TIPS has become a almost mandatory requirement. If you have an event and you serve craft beer, hopefully at that event, then the people that you hire or the group of people that you try to gather has to certainly be TIPS certified, to help you not having any problems with liability. The same happens a little bit with food. It's called Safe Serve, S-A-V-E, and then Serve, S-E-R-F, one word, which is the same approach as TIPS for alcohol, but Safe Serve meaning a safe way of serving food. Wait staff knowing what's in the food is safe for consumption for the customer. So a lot of events, restaurants today ask also to have their employees complete these courses. They are offered by the National Restaurant Association, and you can take them pretty much inexpensively. But again, it has become a requirement almost to do that. So another one that I looked at is then the Certified Hotel Administrator, which is an administrative type of license when you oversee food production. So think of you working for a company that has an event office. As a large outdoor industry company, you have your own event office. There it would make sense to have that kind of management certification to qualify you in addition with that industrial certification. Okay, so again, the quality of service is another one that we try to look at, and then food safety We have tried to use HACCP. I don't know whether any of you have heard that. It's a health analysis, critical control points. It's a food safety program that came from NASA, was developed by the aerospace industry, and we try to follow it like a 7-step process today to make sure that the food that we serve, the food that we produce, is safe for human consumption. So when you put on a food event, HACCP procedures would be a good one to apply to avoid any kind of foodborne illnesses, outbreaks. You certainly don't want that headline, Cannondale product introduction left 60 people sick with food poisoning. I'm sure Cannondale does not like that kind of headline in a newspaper. So, and if you think about it, we have about 74 million people per year get sick with some type of foodborne illness. It is a big concern. So HACCP is another one that we look at. Two other things that address the quality of your service. If you do it more consistently, I would expose my service to Cicerone, which is the beer server master's courses. So that means if you have events when you consistently serve alcohol beer, Cicerone is more to be the expert on the beers, also being able to represent that craft beer industry. And the other one would be this master sommelier. If it's a finer dining kind of environment, that you have people who know how to select the wines, how to present wines for particular events that you set up. So that's a little bit about the certification, the why and what we have in the food and beverage industry. And again, the focus is avoiding bad publicity from a food disaster that could happen at a event that you're scheduling. Any questions on that, or?
How many of you have been involved in these kinds of certifications or courses and things like that? What's been your experience with those kinds of courses and certifications? Go ahead, Addie. I see you took off your mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I've had to do TIPS certification a couple times because I've been in food and beverage for about 10 years. So originally it was every 7 years it expired, and now it's every 3 years. Mm-hmm. So I have to do it pretty frequently. And then the place that I manage now, it's a pizzeria and bar in Durango, Colorado. And I've had to take the Cicerone test to qualify for that as well.
Yeah.
So, luckily, both things my company's paid for, so I haven't had to do that out of pocket. But yeah, it's pretty common.
Yeah. And again, it certainly helps to avoid issues that you might have with patrons in a bar or at an event.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And what we do here at school, I mean, the students who goes to the food and beverage resort management classes, they normally get those type of certifications as a freebie offer, so that when they go and apply at restaurants or bars, that they have that kind of certification.
Nice.
And the other one is for fundraising. If our students, like the athletes, go out, then they go to course field, also then they have to have those TIP certification, and they can right away then work as part of the concessions at Core Fields or Pepsi Center in Denver. So it certainly helps. Very good. All right. Good. Okay. Well, I will move on a little bit on the international scene. Obviously, food and beverage is global. And the topic that I thought of mostly is your challenges as providing food event for outdoor industry events is the cultural impact on food selection. One of my students worked for the Russian embassy in Argentina, and he was asked to put together a reception. And at the reception were obviously diplomats from Saudi Arabia, from Arab nations. There were people from India with Hindu background, and the struggle to see, okay, you have this kind of global group. What kind of food do you serve? What kind of drink is acceptable for everybody? What is the portion size? You know, in America, we like bigger portions. If you go to other countries, you know, the beverage size, the food size is smaller. And those are the kinds of things that you have to deal with. So this kind of cultural preferences for certain food and beverage becomes a big one. We did the food and beverage for the House of Switzerland at the Athens Olympics and the Beijing Olympics. And again, these houses of the US, Switzerland, every country has a house, and they open to everybody from everywhere. So it's like a public place to host. And again, what kind of menu do you put together? What kind of drinks do you put together to, satisfy and kind of not hurt any of those guests that come to those hospitality centers, with these different backgrounds. So that's a big, big challenge that you will face to find out, how these kind of events will affect you. And it could be something as silly as what you call a product. I don't know, are you familiar with Church's chicken? And, well, Church's chicken, calling it Church's chicken does not go over well in some cultures. So obviously Church's chicken has to be called Texas chicken to drop the name Church as part of the name. It can be something as simple as that some cultures take as an offensive statement, and you have to be aware of what kind of message you send. Or you have, one of the examples I had was the arch burger for McDonald's that we served at events. And in some Germanic languages, arch means your rear, your behind. And that didn't go over too well in some of those languages. So in the working this cross-cultural environments, you have to be very sensitive. And most of you know what it means to work in these different cultures. But it's sometimes these little things you don't expect to come back to haunt you that you will be faced with later. Just on the let's say these big mega events like Olympics, World Championships, where you have products being displaced, those are the ones where you face those type of customs and regulations. And obviously, the regulatory part in a cross-cultural setting is also huge, because we might have a certain regulation for something, and in another culture that doesn't exist. I was with my students in Switzerland for the spring semester, and we had a snowboard and ski trial day up on the mountain, and there's no problem for them to serve alcohol as part of people skiing. I mean, nobody thought about liability issues, risk of people drinking a couple of beers, then go snowboard down the mountain. So the regulatory kind of framework of putting that event on was different than, I cannot imagine doing that in Crested Butte, serving beer on the top of the mountain and then have people go down on the skis or snowboards to test out the product. Okay, so that is normally a big headache. And then just as a general standpoint, obviously, what I see in the food industry is the globalization of food, especially in the fast food industry. If you look at McDonald's, KFC, Popeyes, all these big companies that have matured in the US, their growth today happens in foreign markets. McDonald's has more stores outside of the US than inside the US, and they make about 60% of their earnings in foreign markets. So as a general industry in the US, what we see is the food, especially the fast food industry, going into these global markets. And they have to make adjustments too. So the Big Mac equivalent in India is the Maharaji burger, which obviously cannot have beef as a main ingredient. So it refers back to this kind of complex issues when you talk about cultural differences in these kind of events. Any question? If I'm going too fast, or okay.
I'll pose a question. I know that many of you have traveled overseas to foreign countries in a variety of aspects. What have been your great and or scary experiences with food in foreign countries? What have you guys experienced? Go ahead, Dan.
I've spent quite a bit of time in Africa and Switzerland, by the way. Rushdi is really delicious.
Okay.
But I found that, traveling overseas has just broadened my palate. Luckily, I've never really come down with a gnarly stomach bug. But I think some standards are different. I was in Italy once, and I was impressed with the fact that, you go to a meat shop and all the meats are hanging up, and then they have dogs in there and stuff, and they're not concerned about they don't have the same health code, I guess, and everything was delicious and wonderful. So, it's my take.
Very good. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Rich, I think you were going to say something.
I did, yeah, and then I had the cough. But I think I like how you hit on the alcohol, the difference in the cultures, especially in Europe. I'm talking about Europe mostly here, where alcohol seems to be more a part of a daily routine. I've been in places where helicopter pilots landed, had some beers, and then got right back in the helicopter and took off. It's astounding, and it's kind of a shame that over here, in my opinion, we have such an issue with it. And when you talk about liability and stuff, the minute you say alcohol, it can really crank up the requirements when it comes to different events, as far as liability and protection.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, and there you see even a big difference. I mean, since I'm in that industry, if you have fermented drinks, which is beer and wine, there is quite a bit of tolerance and possibility. But I also distill brandy. And when you talk about distilling and spirits, then really everything blocks over here. I mean, we really look at producing, selling, and consuming spirits at even another level of scrutiny, so to speak. Okay? I can just tell you for Colorado laws, if you have an event and you want to sell alcohol, if you have beer and wine, you can have servers that are 18 years old. They have to be supervised by somebody who's 21 years old in that setup of your event. But for somebody to serve spirits, everybody has to be above 21 years of age. So there's always a big difference between regulation when it comes to spirits versus distilled products versus the fermentation or fermented kind of drinks. Okay. And just as a funny story, I don't think you get tested on it, but when we were in Switzerland in the spring, the happy hour started at 12 o'clock at night. And guess where our students were? They were at happy hour, 12 o'clock at night. And that went as long as people wanted to stay in the bar. And so 8:30 class in the morning was kind of a drag, I can tell you. So, again, it's their kind of concept. And if you were drunk and you wanted a 6-pack of beer to go home, they would still sell you that 6-pack of beer to take with you. Okay, so as you said correctly, Dan, it's quite a different approach to the drinking. Okay? And it created some problems the first 2 weeks, let me assure you. But even the hardiest drinkers, after 2 weeks, they were kind of mellowing out and figured out they could not be in class at 8:30 if they stayed at the bars all night. So, and it even impacted the snowboarding. So, anyway.
Can't have that.
Yeah, no. Any other question? Again, it's just some surface kind of materials to just scratch on it.
Seth, I think you had a comment.
Yeah, one thing I noticed, especially international scene, living and working in Copenhagen, the difference between vegetarian, vegan, and the language barriers tend to really get mixed up. In Copenhagen, vegetarian meant still you can eat fish, but maybe not something else. And I've noticed many times just food preferences or dietary restrictions, maybe with the new gluten-free trends, meat-free trends, vegan trends, or no meat or cheese. A lot of times within cultural languages and barriers and social norms, they tend to get mixed and confused. And when someone may be a vegetarian, maybe they'll just serve them, a slice of fish or something, because that's not, within there. And I find that difference in language and cultural norms really tends to play out with vegetarians, vegans, and that aspect.
Yeah, all types of foodborne, allergies. Really, you see a big difference, and you're right, and that's something you have to address and look at when you have an event in Copenhagen that you would organize for your company. What does it mean if somebody says vegan over there? Well, they serve you an egg still and fish, and that's okay. So that's why, I mean, you really have to familiarize yourself with those cultural standards and implications on the food. Yeah, I can only agree with what you're saying. Okay. All right. Well, the other, let me then move on. I made myself a couple notes on overseeing food and beverage. I mean, what are some of the operational aspects? I mean, the regulation, the culture is also inflowing onto your operation. But a big one that obviously, when you organize events with food, what's some of the standards? By the way, these are not standards that I have created, but rather what I recommend is that you look at the NRA, the other NRA, which is the National Restaurant Association. And if you will be asked to run a food event, they have some very good industry standards, percentages that you can work with and make sure that your food operation or beverage operation will be profitable, or at least not lose money for your company. And that's very useful. So it's the National Restaurant Association that publishes all these different ratios, guidelines for what you need. It could be as simple as that you have a stand-up tent for an opening, and you can look and see how much your square footage has to be to host a certain number of people for American standards. Okay, I mean, we have a certain space, privacy space, intimate space around us, and if you set up a tent or a venue for so many people, you can go online and find out, well, that's the square footage per person in that kind of a setup. If you have a sit-down event, if you have only stand-up, what are those kind of requirements? And I find that very helpful, that all those kind of standards are available as a starting point. Okay, I say some of you work in the industry, you have experience, so you know these things. But if you suddenly start working with someone, say, well, would you mind organizing this event? Where do you start? I mean, you need normally to start with some information. So one is obviously the food cost that we work with in the US is about 30% food cost. So if you have an event, that's normally where you start. Obviously, you can run that up to 40% if you have fine dining, fresh food, organic, locally produced food versus kind of convenient type of food, which is opening boxes or cans that have been prepared for you. The same is true for beverages. That means if we have a fundraiser or an opening, beverages are a big contributor to your revenues, around 30%, yet they have a lower beverage cost or cost factor than food. So very helpful if you have an event where you have food and alcohol, which very often required to have together by law. You can offset the higher food cost with balancing the revenue from the alcoholic beverages, which is actually a funny one. If you work in the food and beverage industry, beverages means alcoholic drinks, only alcoholic drinks. So if you see an income statement, you see food and beverage, coffee, milk, tea is actually a food cost or food revenue, and only alcoholic drinks are registered under your beverage. So it's actually, how do you call it? If you say something double.
Double counting. Yeah.
Double counting. If you say alcoholic beverages, because beverages, by definition in the food industry, is alcoholic. Okay? So that would be something there. The other thing that I normally look at is a lot of people worry about the food cost and the beverage cost, but the problem is the percentage you cannot to the bank. And so look at the contribution margin. The contribution margin is normally the difference between the revenue and your costs and expenses that you have for a product. And if you want to have a financially successful event, you want to make sure, one, that you look at your food and beverage cost, but really the contribution margin, how much money is there between the revenue and your cost that you take to the bank as dollars. I mean, that goes into your pocket to pay expenses, but also to pay yourself. So when I look at things with my students, we look at, yes, food cost, beverage cost, is important, but really managing the margins more aggressively is what contributes you to your financial success or not. Okay, so some people get really hung up on food and beverage costs, and then they don't see, what is the contribution margin. Does everybody understand what the contribution margin is? So I might sell a steak at the restaurant for $40. The food cost, if it's a good local grass-fed steak, might be at 45%. So that means it's $18 out of that. But I still take the difference, the large dollar amount, to the bank. Okay, that's what I'm looking at, is that dollar amount, the difference between the revenue and the cost that I make as money.
Michael, how do you bring in labor cost into that contribution margin?
Okay, in the contribution margin, what we normally look at, there are different pricing models. You can go online and there are 5-6 different models on how to set prices. And if we look at the ingredient, that means the beverage or the food cost, we use what we call a prime cost method. Prime cost meaning any business, the main expenses are labor and the input of products. And so we normally look at that then as a prime cost way of setting the price. And that in the US runs about 60%. 30% labor cost, 30% food cost as our pricing structure. The assumption there's obviously the 40% difference pays for additional expenses plus a contribution either to a not-for-profit organization or for an income if you have a proprietary business. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Another one there is if you have an event that is very critical to us is the mix of food that you put together. Even if it's a not-for-profit event, you don't want to lose money. So we're looking at what we call menu scoring and menu engineering. I don't know, has anybody heard those two terms? Menu scoring looks and see if you have an event and you serve pizza, hamburgers, hot dogs, and brats as your food, we look and see the combination of those dishes, what is their popularity and what is that contribution. And we come up with a factor score. And that is what we call the menu scoring. And we compare that with a score of dropping the hot dogs and putting in a corn dog, for example. And again, we measure the popularity and the contribution of that corn dog in combination with the other products. And so we see a difference in the score either going up or down. Going up means multiplying popularity times a factor of contribution is better. Okay, so you want to see that factor go up higher. The other part of that is then we look at menu engineering, where we look a Boston matrix in identifying those items that are very profitable and eliminating those that what we call dogs. They are not popular and they're not contributing to your profit on your menu. So you use a quadrant to identify your items as being popular and having a contribution margin. And you identify those that are very high in popularity and contribution versus those that are very low, and those are the ones that you would take out. So very important to manage your menu and the profitability of that menu to look at that. Again, very important for a restaurant, for a hotel restaurant, but also for an event where you have to make money perhaps for a not-for-profit organization at the end of that day. Okay, so menu engineering and menu scoring might be terms that you look at, that you might hear, then go and look it up. It's hard to right now tell it without a worksheet. Normally I give my students worksheets where we take local restaurants, where we analyze the menu items, the combination of the menu items, and what does it contribute to the bottom line of that particular restaurant. Okay, I can assure you that a lot of mom and pop restaurants don't do it. The restaurant chains, the casual restaurant themed chains do it all the time. They constantly re-engineer their menus. They look at the profitability on the menu items and then go back and restructure them. Okay. Any questions there on the food? Yes.
With 1 in 8 people having a dietary restriction or preference, how do you sort of factor in those social norms? Because I believe certain places would be different. Say the Bay Area, you may want to lean towards more vegetarian, where in Texas, you're maybe more beef. How does that factor into your menu scoring and your menu engineering based on those, food allergies or preferences in certain areas?
Good question. Yeah. Obviously, you have to look at your clientele, your standard clientele. So if you're in a certain backward part of Texas, serving only vegetarian dishes would probably not go over with your clientele. So yes, you would look at your location, the demand that people have. San Francisco, you mentioned, is a very demanding and progressive food market. So you have to have a lot more consideration for different type of foods. I lived in the back parts of Texas, and you have very conservative type of eaters, and it's all about the barbecue and the meat that they serve. I don't think I've ever had a gluten-free pizza in some of those small towns in a pizza place. Okay, so yes, I 100% agree with you that you have to look and see what are the demands of the different segments in those markets. Okay. And then obviously that would flow into designing your menu, and then you start scoring and engineering your menu once you see the response to that. Does that answer?
Yeah, and then the second and follow-up is, how frequently I work in a resort, and I work a little bit in food and beverage, but I haven't heard this side. How frequently are you taking your information? Is this a monthly basis, weekly basis, or hey, every season we reevaluate, rescore, re-engineer? And I guess it depends on the labor associated, but if in a perfect world and you had good quantitative data, how frequently would you really be looking at this? Because certain food ordering, you need to order 3, 5, 7 days out in front, and you don't want to flip the switch on everything. But how frequently would you suggest something like this?
Well, what I suggest is that you look at your check averages. You try to identify whether you have any problems. I mean, if your check averages, same store sales go up, you probably don't have much reason to jump in right away and analyze your menu. If you see a decline in your check average, you see a decline in your customer count, that means taking those typical indicators where you say, hey, something is not going right. At that point, you would look at your menu as part of that problem. I mean, you would also look at the competition. Are there new restaurants? Are there new bars opening right next to me down the street? But typically we take operating ratios, look at those, and they say, well, it's time to look at our menu, because you don't want to do too much either, because customers come back for certain products. And if you constantly change your menu, you lose those loyal returning customers, because they might come back for that mashed potato or whatever it is that they found on your menu. So I'm not saying we do that every day, but rather look at the indicators of the key performance indicators, and then we look at the menu as one of the factors that we score and engineer. Okay. And you're right. I mean, you have to change your supply chain. You have to sometimes change your inventory management. Suppliers might have to be changed. So it is quite involved in that distribution chain if you make a menu change.
There's a good question here on the chat as well. Who's primarily responsible for those examinations, those looks at the menu and possible changes?
Okay. Those would be definitely owners. It depends on the size of the business. If you have an owner-operated business, the owner-operator should check those. If you have a restaurant that you have a manager, the manager should look at those receipts every night. They should zero out their till at night and see, how is the business developing, and then look at these as alarming signs. So it's really a management owner / kind of responsibility. As an owner, obviously, you want to see if you lose money, and you want to see it pretty fast and make changes. So yeah, that would be the people who would look at these kind of indicators and then jump in to make changes. And again, it's a fine balancing act too. If you're in the restaurant business, that obviously retaining popular items, returning customers come back because you have a signature item that you're famous for. On the other side, making sure that you keep your menu profitable by the best combination of food that you have in that menu mix.
I think sometimes the seasonality of some businesses, it seems to make sense that we might look at these things on a seasonal basis, on a, at a ski resort or a golf course, something like that. We might look at it season to season, but it's also pretty important to know if those dogs pop up pretty often, as opposed to the cash cow on the other hand, right? You don't want to run through a whole season at a ski resort or a golf course or some other type of resort or establishment and have a dog or two sitting there for, a whole season, when there's a possibility that you could go in and make some changes. Now that becomes a challenge at the same time, because, what does that mean for a menu? You might go and take a Sharpie and just start crossing things off. Those kind of things look pretty sketchy. So there's a balance in there somewhere in deciding, what's best for a particular restaurant or organization to make sure that we're, doing our best to maximize profits and meet customer needs across the spectrum. Not only what people want, but what they're allergic to, and making sure that we know what's in a food, so that we don't have individuals who have problems with those kind of things as well. So all good questions and good comments.
So obviously, and you see, it's an interesting one. If you look at the fast casual industry, those are like the smash burgers, the Chipotle, that means fast food, but at a better quality. And if you look at their menus, they tend to be very focused on a couple of items. I don't know whether you have been at a Smash Burger or a Mighty Burger or any of those fast casual concept restaurants. They tend to have very focused, there's a hamburger, there's a cheeseburger, and you can order chicken and you can get your milkshake. I mean, some of these menus have become very focused on, what is their signature item? What do they want to be famous for? And hopefully they do it best as well, so that if they make a burger, it's not frozen, it's fresh meat, it's sometimes ground at the premise for freshness. So some of these menu designs have become pretty streamlined onto the core competence of that particular restaurant. And it's especially in the fast casual segment that we see this kind of focus of the menu to some smaller, more focused menus.
They also make it so that one of my comments earlier is moot, in that making a change to the menu is typing something on a computer that goes onto a screen at the front of the restaurant. There is basically no cost for a menu change.
Yeah.
Right. If something's not performing well.
Yeah.
So.
The other thing is obviously the licensing of alcohol. If you have an event, I assume most of you are in Colorado. I speak about Colorado, if that's okay. But for example, if you have an event where you want to serve alcohol, there is very often a food requirement. So if you have a special event that you put on, you apply 30 days before for a license from your city and from the state of Colorado to be able to serve alcohol. You have to be aware that food has to be served as part of that event. I mean, you cannot just have a drinking event, but rather the states, and Colorado is not the only one, but it varies from state to state how much you have to serve in food with that alcohol. I remember we had a brewing competition here on campus, and again, there was this requirement that we had to offer buffet of food in addition to the alcohol to get the permit from the state and from the city to actually serve the alcohol beverages. Okay? So be aware that what kind of regulations you have for food to accompany those kind. And it depends also then on the different type of business that you have. If you have a microbrew or brew pub, you have a 15% food sales of total revenue requirement. If you have a restaurant and tavern type of license, you have to have 25% of your revenue from food of the total food and beverage revenue again. So there's certain requirements that we have in states that determine that you have to serve food when you serve beverages. And again, in New Mexico, that might be completely different. In Wyoming, so you have to make sure that when you work there, that you familiarize yourself with those kind of alcohol, food-related licensing requirements that you want to serve. Another topic, before I bore you with operations, that we have problem with is inventory control in food and beverage. We have a saying that profits walk out of the back kitchen door because a lot of people have no clue what are indicators of true food cost or beverage cost in the industry, and the control of the inventory is lacking. Okay. In the old days, this was walking into the walk-in refrigerator, counting, going into the freezer and count. Today, a lot of that is made easier with integrated information systems where you use QR codes on the food product. So if it goes into the fridge, if it goes out of the fridge, it's automatically recorded into an ordering system. And your supplier knows, yes, we used 5 steaks. Next time they deliver, they will bring you up to the par value or the bar standards that you set of number of steak for that season or for that particular time period. So inventory control is a big one, especially for alcohol. I don't know, I heard somebody's working at a bar. I think it was at, okay. All the tricks that people played in bars with serving alcohol, right? Taking an expensive bottle of whiskey and then filling up with a little cheaper version of that whiskey and serving it without customers mostly determining that. So there were a lot of abuse in the bar and lounge and drink industry, but very strict inventory controls today have tried to limit that a little bit because you can lose a lot of money. If you have a bartender at an event and they say, hey, Jimmy, hi, wonderful to see you. Let me make you a gin tonic, and you fill it up 3/4 with gin and top it off a little bit with tonic water. That certainly will impact your finance or financial calculations versus having a standard 1 ounce or 2 ounce in that gin and tonic drink. So a lot of focus today on inventory control on food and especially on beverages. Some places actually, if you have a lot of liquor stores, liquor sales, you actually have to bring a bottle back to a centralized storage room, and you get an exchange of one bottle, empty bottle, and you get a new bottle for your bar operation. I don't know whether that's the case in your place, but the regulation and the control of the, especially spirits and beverages in the industry have been quite significant. Okay. And I've seen that we have done I don't know whether anybody heard of the Chilean Beer Festival up in CB that we have, and we ran some of the commissions, and it's amazing how many packs of beer disappeared on that event. You know, I mean, they miraculously disappeared somewhere, but that's just the way it is. You know, somebody say, hey, buddy, take a beer here or take a beer there. So that part of the industry has to be very carefully. Another one, obviously, is inventory of food and the safety of food, especially if you have an outdoor event. If you have food that is perishable, make sure that it's properly stored. And I would recommend that you check today that you have a food DNA as part of your supplied food. I don't know, has anybody heard of food DNA placement? That means traceability of food. Addie, you shake your head. Yes, perhaps you can add something here.
Actually, that was going to be my question. I was just going to say, in the restaurant, I feel like it's pretty easy for me to regulate food DNA and portion control as well as inventory. But when doing events, I feel like it's so much harder, especially being able to just like test the temperatures of your foods and make sure everything is up to par at all times, because they can change within minutes and hours. So yeah, just like if it was an outdoor venue, what do you suggest for, regulating that? Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, it is a problem. That's what I say. As soon as you take food outside, how do you properly chill it? How do you properly keep it warm and keep it out of what we call the food danger zone, right? Between 40 degrees and 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And what you can do is have there maximum times in which the food is exposed, to normal room temperature, outside temperature. But the other thing is, you have to take refrigeration, ice boxes, make sure that these are properly chilled. And you take a little bit of a gamble being outside because it's not accurate as your refrigerator where you can measure the temperature consistently. Okay. The other one.
Is there ever a health inspector or something? I do mainly small events. I just did a hot air balloon festival last weekend, but at big corporate events, is there ever a health inspector or someone who regulates all of these things?
Yes, I mean, and typically where you see the inspection by the health department is in the commissary or the base kitchen of that supplier of food. So I've not seen it much on the event itself, but rather the inspection and the control of the kitchen that you perhaps rent or the kitchen that is providing the food, and making sure that they follow proper procedures for the event. And the assumption is that they know about the dangers. Is it perfect? No. It's the same. The health department always shows up when you have rush at dinner or lunch, and you're constantly in that walk-in refrigerator and the temperature is up, and they come and say, hey, your temperatures are, well, yes, we are constantly going in and out of that refrigerator. Obviously, the temperature is not at the perfect level that you want. But that's the health department then too. It does not make sense if the restaurant is closed and perfectly cleaned for them to check procedures and safety. The other thing that I want to say, there's too, most of the outdoor events, you try to have cooked food or food that does not have to be treated some other ways and is safe to consume. It's not always possible, but that's a trend that I see in outdoor events, that they try to have food that is being cooked, and so it's more resistant to foodborne illnesses and so on. That's another option there, obviously. But yeah, a perfect answer, no. And believe me, I marvel at the people who put on outdoor dinners for hundreds of people, and they pull that off with hot boxes and coolers, and nobody dies afterwards. So it's a challenge. Okay, and never perfect. I don't know whether that's a satisfactory answer, but that's.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Got about 5 minutes or so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay,
It's perfect.
The other one is obviously then I think I've covered everything I want to have from an operational. And that's what I have too. The food logistics at events. It's a big challenge. Okay. The last thing I have then is a couple of challenges and opportunities in the industry. Obviously, in the beverage industry right now, opportunities are with craft beverages. People love craft beer. They love artisan type of liquors. As you probably know, wherever you are, that, brew pubs, microbrews are springing up everywhere. Almost we have crossed the peak of that development. And right now it's the artisan type of distilleries. We have Montagna whiskey here in the valley, Cold Creek whiskey, and Deer Hammer over in Buena Vista. So all these kind of local type of distilleries are big ones. So there's a lot of demand, a lot of opportunity too. And especially what I see is that a product introduction in the outdoor industry works together with these kind of craft businesses because they represent local, they represent the connectedness to the environment and where they come from. And so, like, if you go to a place, New Belgium is almost at most big events, introduction of products. Eddie Line, I just saw this weekend on a place. So there's a lot of opportunities because these people are young, very innovative type of entrepreneurs. They love their beers and they love their spirit, and they also like to hook up with outdoor industry because that's kind of the lifestyle, the philosophy that they share with that particular industry. So a lot of opportunities that I see for you if you have to do this kind of food and beverage events for rolling out products, to work with that kind of local industry, especially in the beverage one. The other one is about two is a local food. People like to have local food. So if you have events, bringing some of the local restaurants, people that use local cuisine and local products in their cooking. And I found that to be a very good opportunity for both sides. Obviously, exposure for the food business, but also for the outdoor industry partners in those kind of events. So that's it. Obviously, you have that conflict between craft food and beverages and indulgence factors. I mean, some people still like to have that broad, even so it's not the healthiest, but perhaps you can find it from a local butcher or from a local producer rather than buying Eckert's or some large corporate type of produced food. Yeah, I think that's the other challenge. The challenge is obviously employment with minimum wages going up in the industry. So if you have to staff some of these events with the increase in minimum wages here, you have to obviously look at your labor cost and your cost factor for putting on the event. One of the big ones there is that a lot of local groups like to get involved, volunteers. I was just at the Great American Beer Fest as a volunteer, and there were thousands of people like me who just want to be there to volunteer. We didn't get paid, not even in beer, but you want to be there and help out, those kind of events that you see. A big one, there's also tipping. Do you allow tipping? And we struggle with that right now in the industry. I don't know how you feel when you go to a fast food restaurant or fast casual. Do you leave tips? I mean, you go to the counter, you pick up your food or drink, you take it to your table, and you very often bus your own table as well. So even so it's a fast casual concept, you still provide the service. Would you tip? I see different. Okay, some people say yes, some people no. Okay.
I see mostly no.
I think sometimes when it comes down to that, if it's a family-owned and operated restaurant, absolutely, because I know it goes straight to the bottom line. But other large-scale ones, I figure they've figured those costs in, and that should be part of the employee cost. So I really think it depends on those types of things.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation, and correct too. Is, I mean, if you go to a local, bar, and also you have mostly then local employees that you very often know. Right. I mean, these are people that you see. Obviously, you want to support them versus McDonald's Corporation. They don't need your tip. Okay. So, but it's a big one. And then, you have different responses when you have these events where the service that help you put up a tip jar. Is that something that you want to allow or not? Okay. Because very often these people volunteer, and then should they have the chance to at least get some tips from people who come to your beer stand or to pick up some food. Okay, so again, it's perhaps for some people it's not a big topic, but in the food industry right now it is, and you probably have seen it. That should we include tip? Should we raise prices in restaurants so that it includes the service, so you don't have to worry about tipping? Or will we lose service quality if we give up the tipping because people will not provide extra effort and quality service if they already know what they earn? Okay. Some of you have traveled in Europe. You might have seen it because it's included there, and the service quality can go up and down quite significantly because, hey, we earn already the money, so I don't have to be very friendly, outgoing towards the guest. So, all right.
Very good. Go ahead, Seth.
I had one other kind of quick question. It sounds like you've done a lot of your own traveling and others. Something that we face in the resort industry are weddings and the idea of maybe kosher meals or not. Can you describe, besides kosher, are there other meal preparation, and it could be short and sweet, and we can go and look into it others. Are there other meal preparation techniques or practices that maybe we should be aware of? So if we're in conversation with clients and they say, hey, we would like it this way, are there any others that you could help to short and maybe bullet point and we could look into later so we're not caught off guard, so it's not like, oh, I've never heard of that?
Mm-hmm. So obviously kosher is a big one, and halal is the other one. That means butchering in the Muslim tradition of meat. So those are the two ones. And my recommendation is to see if you have a customer who wants those kind of special food needs, we normally outsource, or we used to outsource, because cooking in a proper kosher way is quite a setup. I mean, you have to have different sets of dishes for different types of food groups. Butchering halal is not everybody's preference on how to butcher a sheep or a goat. So what we normally do is, if we have clients that had these special food preparation needs, we would normally outsource, find somebody who can butcher halal, prepare food halal way, or in the kosher way, and coordinate it with those people, because it takes expertise. That also goes into, I was involved with a large hotel in Chicago, and one of our food outlets was a kosher restaurant. Very successful, but we never ran that restaurant ourselves. It was always outsourced to people who could really properly prepare kosher food, and then we collected rent and so on, but we did not get involved in running the kosher restaurant. We were just not expert enough to pull that off. But you cannot play around with it. It's like, well, we cook a little bit kosher, or we prepared a little bit halal. I mean, people get very upset if you kind of pretend that's what you do, but you're not really following 100% the rules of that food preparation. Those would be the two that I know the most. The other one, obviously, if you go to Asia, and I have not done a lot, is that Asians like to see the fresh food first. I mean, they like to see, what is that chicken? What is that fish that you get? And for our events, that's kind of difficult to do. I think, Dan, you mentioned before that in Italy or in Greece, chicken and meat is just hanging out in the open. And I don't think they poison more people than we do, but it's just their culture. They like to see the animals, or the larger part of the animal, before you buy it and also cook. Again, outsourcing would be my recommendation on doing those kind of things.
Any other final question before we wrap up? Okay. A great thank you to Dr. V for being with us tonight. Grateful for his expertise. It's good stuff. So
thank you very much.
Right.
Nice meeting everybody. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
thanks. Have a good night.
Bye.